على أشرفهم أجمعين حبيب قلوبنا وطبيب نفوسنا وشفيع ذنوبنا أبي القاسم المصطفى محمد اللهم صل على محمد وعلى آل بيته الطيبين الطاهرين المعصومين لا سيما بقية الله في الأرضين واللعنة الدائمة على أعدائهم أجمعين من يومنا هذا إلى قيام يوم الدين. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. رب اشرح لي صدري ويسر لي أمري واحلل عقدة من لساني يفقه قولي. وقال رسول الله صلى الله عليه وآله وسلم إن الحسين مصباح الهدى وسفينة النجاة. صلوا على محمد وآل محمد. الله وآل Muhammad وأجل فرجه. Dear brothers and sisters, mu'mineen and mu'minat, mourners and lovers of Imam Hussein alayhi salam, salamun alaykum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. At the outset, let me thank the organizers for having made this improvement today, removing this barrier for this part of our program. This part of a program is something that all the participants here participate in. This is a good move. And I have another suggestion to offer in this regard as well. If it is possible and feasible, it's up to the organizers to see. Perhaps the speaker, which in this case is myself, the speaker for this program could also alternate his seating one night on this side and another night on the other side, and so on and so forth. Perhaps, if this is practical, please look into it. Now, coming back to our discussion, we are well past the halfway mark of these 10 special days and nights, the first 10 days of the holy month of Muharram, and we are rapidly approaching the climax of this period, the day of Ashura. We are on a journey towards the light that we have seen emanating from Karbala. We are on a journey to join Hussein ibn Ali's caravan and play a role in his mission along with him. Just as in every other journey, this journey too has its adab and its manners and etiquette. And we've been going over some of those over the last few nights. The adab I would like to draw our attention to tonight is the importance of engaging our families, especially our children, in our commemorations and mourning for Karbala and Ashura. This is one of the important adab of this journey. And I was very happy to have the opportunity this afternoon to participate in the madrasa's program in this regard, which was held right here. It was very encouraging. I felt very optimistic to be here among those children, to be here among those youth who are preparing themselves to play a major role in this mission in the future, inshallah. Involving them in these mourning ceremonies is important. Alhamdulillah, I see that families bring their children here. The children may run around and cause some commotion, but as long as that doesn't get out of hand, that's absolutely fine. That's absolutely fine. It's important that they should feel comfortable here. This should be something that they get used to as they are growing up. And of course, there should be also a few special programs for these children. These programs are for us adults with children along with us. But there are programs that can be designed for children in particular. morning ceremonies, perhaps some sports and games, various programs that engage them. One of the factors here, one of the things and elements in our culture which is very conducive and helpful to this is our tradition of having majalis in our homes. After these 10 days are over, many of us start having these commemoration majalis in our homes on weekends, on other days. This is very, very important, and it should be encouraged as much as possible, because this allows our kids and other members of the family to be totally engaged in this culture, in arranging these programs. So inshallah, I hope this culture which already exists among us will continue, and not just continue, but will flower and prosper in the future, inshallah. Please recite a salawat ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. Wow. Muhammad wa ali Muhammad wa ajil farajum. Over these nights, we've been going over some points that will help us recognize the system of imamat better. We have seen over the preceding nights that this system of guidance is Islam's fundamental system of guidance. It is through imamat that humanity will be guided and is being guided. We've seen that this system of imamat is remarkable for a number of reasons and features. One of which is it is untiring. It never stops. It is always at work. Another feature is that it always finds a way to overcome the obstacles in its path. Yet another feature is that it is invincible. The examples are in your minds over the past few nights. It is invincible, it is undefeatable. It suffers setbacks, but it cannot be defeated at all. And when we tried to understand why it is undefeatable, we came across a couple of important characteristics. One of the features of imamat that makes it undefeatable and invincible is that it is able to turn every threat into an opportunity, every perceived failure into a success. Last night we saw the example of Imam Raza alayhi salatu wassalam. Please recite a salawat. Allahumma salli ala Muhammad. The tyrant of the time sought to destroy the movement of imamat by associating the center of this movement, that is the Holy Imam, with his oppressive rule. That was the strategy that he had adopted. And this is a great danger for our movement. For our movement, or for the members of our movement, to be associated with the structures of oppression, with the systems of evil. It is a big threat. And we saw and we learnt a lesson from our Holy Imam in that case, that when we find ourselves in such a position, of course, at first we should try to get out of such a situation, avoid getting stuck in such a situation. But if we find ourselves in such a situation and we cannot dissociate ourselves, then let's learn from our Holy Imam how he used this threat and turned it into an opportunity to serve the movement and strengthen it further. This is an important lesson. It could be that our profession, our jobs, our nationalities, whatever, may sometimes place us in a position where we end up feeling associated with the systems of oppression. And this is an important lesson for us to keep in mind. Tonight, I'd like to offer another important example of how this system manages to turn threats into opportunities. And this one is particularly relevant to us, particularly relevant to each and every one of us. Each and every one of us. Dear brothers and sisters, any movement requires for its survival that it should be in touch with its leader. guided by its leader. The leader of any movement needs to be accessible to its followers for that movement to survive and flourish and prosper. But dear brothers and sisters, we are part of a movement, the leader of which, the center of which, has been inaccessible to us for 1150 years. 1 year of inaccessibility should be enough to crush a movement. 2 years should be enough to bury it. But look at us. 1150 years, no direct access to the leader of our movement, and yet we have managed to survive. And not just survive, we've been going over this the last few nights. We are doing pretty well. We are growing. Yes, there are lots of weaknesses, but we are doing pretty well on the whole. This is yet another example of this movement managing to turn threat into opportunity. Certainly, being disconnected, not having easy and direct access to the leader is a threat. But this period of ghaibah, this period of ghaibat that we find ourselves in, and we have been in this for centuries now, is also an opportunity for us to develop our talent in a somewhat independent fashion. You know, this always happens when we are training our kids, when we are training those who work for us. In the initial stages, we tell them everything. You need to do this, don't do this, do this. But then there comes a point when we tell them to go figure it out on your own. Don't we do that? And that is the time when that child or that trainee acquires independence, the power of judgment, acquires strength when he is encouraged or in fact maybe forced to solve his problems on his own. This is what has been happening with us, the vanguard of this movement, the Shia, ever since it began. We have been tossed into the deep end and asked to figure out how to swim by ourselves. And this is perhaps the reason why I came across this very interesting hadith in this regard. I just want to make this point using this hadith and move on to the new points that I have prepared for tonight. The clock seems to be racing faster than on other nights tonight. We have this lovely hadith in this regard, which helps us understand how this threat of ghaibah, this disconnection, apparent disconnection with our leadership, has actually worked in our favor in some ways. We have a hadith in our hadith literature which speaks of the Holy Messenger, Hazrat Muhammad Mustafa sallallahu alayhi wa alihi wa sallam. Allahumma salli ala wa ali Muhammad. He is sitting among his companions. He is sitting among his companions and he raises his arms and he prays to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and he says, Allahumma laqini ikhwani. Oh my Lord, please arrange for me to meet my brothers. Laqini ikhwani. And then he pauses. He's surrounded by his companions. Raises his arms again and he says, Allahumma laqini ikhwani. Oh my Lord, please help me. Please arrange for me to meet my brothers. Now the companions around him, they start to wonder. They look at each other. And then one of them hesitantly asks the Holy Messenger, Aman nahnu ikhwanuk, Ya Rasulallah? Aren't we your brothers? We are with you right now. Why are you praying for the opportunity to meet us? We are right here. To which the Holy Messenger replies and says, La innakum ashabi. You are my companions. You are my companions. Wa ikhwani qawmun fi akhir zaman. My brothers are a group of people who will live at the end of times, akhir zaman. They will believe in me. They will have faith in me, firm, unshakable faith in me, even though none of them has ever set his eyes upon me. Even though he has never set his eyes upon me. So now you can see this has become possible because of the distance, because of the ghaibat, because of the fact that our leadership and hujjat is not directly accessible. Of course, this period of ghaibat from looked at from certain other angles and perspectives is a terrible time and it causes problems as well. But from this aspect that it helps us develop our abilities and strengths, it is a wonderful example of this movement managing to turn the biggest and the deadliest of threats into an opportunity. How else can a movement that survives on loving obedience to a charismatic leader survive for 1150 years without having any access to its charismatic leader? It is because of these positive aspects. Please recite another salawat. Ala Muhammad wa Ali Muhammad. Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa Ali Muhammad.
Especially those near the barriers, the yellow barriers, please kindly move forward so the ladies have more space. Jazakallah. Thank you. Muhammad wa Ali Muhammad salawat.
Allahumma salli ala. Thank you, dear brothers. Please come further ahead. There's still a lot of space here on my right hand. I'd request the youth and the kids especially to please come up further ahead. Thank you very much. Please recite another salawat. Ala Muhammad wa salli ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad wa ajil farajwa. Another feature of this movement which has made it so remarkably successful, apart from the fact that it is a movement itself makes any system successful. Apart from it being a movement, it has a vanguard. We spoke of this as well last night. We Shia are the vanguard of the movement called Imamat. The vanguard, these are a select group and number of people who understand the movement better than the other followers, who are more committed to it, more loyal to it, more obedient, more patient, more hardworking. And Alhamdulillah, we Shia have been blessed and honored to be given the status of the vanguard of the Imamat movement. And since our vanguard is one which is very diverse, and because entry into this vanguard doesn't require any lengthy courses of education, any training in special arts and skills, any wealth, none of this. Entry into this vanguard simply requires a loving desire to obey the leader of this movement. That's all it requires. You have all sorts of people becoming a part of this vanguard. Different languages, different ethnicities, different levels of education, wealth, etc. Men, women, children, everybody. And which necessarily necessitates that our cultural religious programs, be it morning ceremonies such as these or any others, need to have sufficient variety. Programs that address kids, that address ladies, that address men, those that address our intellectual side, perhaps sports and games, things that help us develop our knowledge, things that develop our skills. Because we are going to have a vanguard which is very broad-based and diverse. And in this in particular, and this has been emphasized, and I will emphasize it again, our programs need to have a strong emotional element as well. The emphasis on crying, for example, in our programs is a strategic choice made by this movement to keep itself together and to grow from strength to strength. Let me just elaborate one point about crying, dear brothers and sisters. I'm sure you will agree with me. Crying is something that all human beings engage in. Isn't that the case? Just like all human beings smile and laugh, all human beings cry. It's something that human society is completely familiar with. But what does the world usually have to say about crying? When someone is crying, for example, over the loss of a loved one, bereavement, a loved one has passed away from this world. And I would request all of us together to recite just one salawat for all the mu'mineen who used to be among us but are no longer among us today. Let's please recite a salawat for their darajat. Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. When we lose a beloved person, a loved one, what does the world tell us? Tell us. The world tells us, go ahead, cry. If we are seen not crying, struck by grief, but not crying, our friends, our relatives, our colleagues tell us, go ahead, cry. It will make you feel better. Isn't that commonly said? It will lighten the load in your heart. It will help you get over it. That's how the world looks at crying. It sees crying as a useful thing to help you get over something. But dear brothers and sisters, crying in our movement and maktab isn't done to get over anything. It isn't done to get over anything. We are not crying because we miss Imam Hussein. We are not crying because we wish to see Lady Zainab. We are crying because we feel the pains and the trials and tribulations that they underwent in their mission. We are crying because when we cry, our entire existence fuses with the existence of Imam Hussein and his followers. Our dreams are the same that their dreams were. Their pain becomes our pain. Their joys become our joys. Their mission becomes our mission. And their battle cries such as Hayhat min Nazillah become our battle cries. Crying in our maktab is not to get over something, but it is to get into something. It is a completely different approach to crying. And it is very important for us, therefore, crying. And now it makes more sense. These ahadith that emphasize crying, that go so far as to say, Man baka, aw abka, aw tabaka. Even if somebody is to force himself to cry, even though he doesn't feel like crying, he wants to cry, but there are no tears coming. Even if he forces himself so that he can finally end up crying, regardless of whether he is successful in having tears gush down his cheeks or not, wajabat lahul jannah. Jannat is guaranteed for him. So we see the importance of crying. This is not some emotional release valve to let out some emotional pressure that we feel. No, that's for other people. We cry not to get over something. We cry to get into something. Deeper and deeper and deeper into this Husseini movement and the movement of Imamat. And therefore, it is very important to keep this in mind. I see that once again we are short of time. Please support me with another salawat. Ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad wa ajil farajum. Dear brothers and sisters, we've seen how this movement turns threats into opportunities. We've seen how this movement has a vanguard. And we are left wondering, seeking answers to this question, how is this movement able to do this? And over the preceding nights and tonight, we've been trying to figure out some of these answers. Yet another answer lies in the fact that our leaders, the Masumeen alayhimus salam, especially the Imam of our time, Allahumma salli ala Muhammad. Though we may have been denied direct access to the leader of this movement for centuries now, ever since Ghaibat began, we have not been denied guidance. We have not been denied guidance, dear brothers and sisters. And that is because this movement has a second rung of leadership as well. A second rung of leadership. And this second rung is and has been accessible at all times. Dear brothers and sisters, I'm referring to our fuqaha, our maraje, the highest level of our scholars. They have been the second rung of leadership ever since Ghaibat began. And while we don't have access to our Imam, we have access to these individuals, generation after generation. And when we are seeking answers as to how this movement has managed to survive for so many centuries despite all these threats and problems, part of the answer lies in this: the existence of this second rung of leadership, easily accessible, perhaps in the same country in which we live, easily accessible through means of communication. This is very important. I don't want to elaborate much further on this point, but I would just like to clarify a point in this relation. Sometimes we hear, perhaps you may have heard it too, I've come across this opinion or this question, this opinion or question that says that Maulana, now with all this advancement in education on the one hand, and advancement in technology on the other hand, communication technology, artificial intelligence now, generative artificial intelligence now, do we still really have need for our scholars now? Earlier on, books of hadith, they weren't easily accessible. The collection Biharul Anwar, the nearest collection of Biharul Anwar was a few 100 kilometers away from where I stay. How am I going to ever access it? But now everything is available by clicking a few buttons. Not everybody understands Arabic. That's still the case. But translation technology is getting so good now, that this handicap is being reduced. And perhaps its remaining flaws may be addressed in the next 10 to 20 years. And it may become almost flawless, just like a human translator. Perhaps. You have ChatGPT and the like, they make wonderful summaries of complex texts and they present them to you. Now, if this is the case, do we really need scholars anymore? Do we really need scholars anymore? Or will we still need scholars 20 years from now? 20 years from now. Dear brothers and sisters, this question comes up, will come up, and will continue to come up again and again. But I am hopeful that in light of the discussions that we've been having over the last few nights and tonight itself, we will be able to answer this with some depth, briefly but deeply. And what is that? Dear brothers and sisters, if the role of an alim is simply limited to opening a book, looking for an answer, and then reciting that answer in a language and form that people understand, then yes, it may be valid to say that we may be on the cusp of an era where alims and Islamic scholars are no longer needed, because technology can do this. If not today, maybe 10 years later, it can do this. But dear brothers and sisters, if the role of an alim is to be the link in a chain that sustains and keeps an Islamic movement running, a movement which relies on its central leadership leading by example, leading by sacrifice, inspiring passion and love, inspiring obedience, making big strategic decisions, moving large sections of humanity from here to there, just as any large movement is supposed to do. No chat GPT, no matter how advanced it may be, can ever replace our ulama. Will we ever listen to the order? Will the Shia ever listen to a chat GPT answer that ends up leading to martyrdom? That's one of the aspects of our movement. Will we ever look up a website and get the answer that says that, yes, I need to sacrifice everything that I have at this point in time? This is only something that a human being can inspire in its followers. Only a human being. Which is why, if we understand the nature of the system of imamat, and we understand that we are part of this imamat, not just part of it, but its vanguard, we will understand the role that our ulama need to play. And we will demand this role of them as well. And when they play this role, we will cooperate with them as well, inshallah ta'ala. There are a few other points that I had, but I think I'll have to skip most of them because we have a shortage of time. Dear brothers and sisters, we spoke last night about izzat, al-izzah, honor, dignity. And we went over how, despite being martyred, massacred, beheaded, and led through the streets of Kufa and Damashq, it is Hussein and Hussein's family and his followers who have true izzat. And his enemies, despite sitting haughtily on their thrones, they may have everything except for izzat. They may have everything except for izzat. And we saw how this essential feature of this movement of imamat, especially as reflected in the Karbala paradigm, draws humanity towards itself. We saw how it draws humanity towards itself. And we saw that Imam Hussein alayhi salam and his followers were aziz and honorable because they were impenetrable. The enemy tried everything to get them to submit to bay'ah, to paying allegiance, but they refused. Impenetrability. Impenetrability is the sign of izzat. And we saw how those who are proud and haughty but disobey Allah, they may be haughty, but they have been penetrated by ignorance, by arrogance, by greed. And therefore they are not aziz, but zalil, debased and dishonored. Debased and dishonored. I'd just like to add one more point here, which to clarify or to clear any misconceptions in this regard, because there is a possibility that if we leave this point here, it may cause some misconception. Dear brothers and sisters, there are a couple of ayat in the Holy Quran that speak of izzah, al-izzah, impenetrability, in a negative sense. I'm just going to read them out for you, dear brothers and sisters. For example, to save time, I'm just going to stick to one. In Surah Baqarah, 206. Surah Baqarah 206, we have an ayah which reads like this: A'udhu billahi minash shaitanir rajim, wa idha qila lahu ittaqillah. And when it is said to him, when it is said to somebody who disobeys Allah, somebody who has deviated from the path of Allah, when it is said to a disbeliever, ittaqillah, fear Allah, have taqwa, be afraid of the consequences of your actions. When it is said to him, what happens? أَخَذَتْهُ الْعِزَّةُ بِالْإِثْمِ. Izzat drags him towards performing more bad deeds. Izzat is the cause that leads him to sin in even greater measure. أَخَذَتْهُ الْعِزَّةُ بِالْإِثْمِ فَحَسْبَهُ جَهَنَّمْ. And Jahannam and the hellfire are enough for someone like him. Dear brothers and sisters, the word al-izzat here is used in a negative sense. It is al-izzat which is causing this person to commit more evil acts. Dear brothers and sisters, this reminds us that when we praise impenetrability, when we praise this human condition of not being influenced by outside forces, it is important to keep in mind that we are praising this condition of impenetrability when the outside influences are devilish and negative. But when the outside influences is an invitation to goodness, it is an invitation to Iman, to Islam, to join the movement of Imamat, in such a case, impenetrability, which means rejection of these invitations, will obviously be a negative element. And which is why we need to be impenetrable, but we need to watch out as to what it is we are being impenetrable with regards to. Inshallah, hopefully, these points will help us ponder over the reality of the system of Imamat better and be able to appreciate true izzat, genuine izzat, and not confuse it with fake forms of izzat. Perhaps it will help us understand why, when we look at our world today and we see, perhaps, in some corner of the world, there are people who are starving, who are wounded, who have died in their tens of thousands. Many more are buried under the rubble. Perhaps we will be able to understand why the entire world, almost, when it looks upon these people, it sees them at the pinnacle of honor and dignity, despite their hunger, their thirst, their wounds, and their rotting dead bodies under the rubble, and feel small, insignificant, and tiny in relation to them. Perhaps we will be able to understand this when we will be able to appreciate the true nature of Izzat and Zillat, inshallah. Please recite another salawat. Ala Muhammad wa Ali Muhammad. Muhammad wa Ajjal Fajr. Dear brothers and sisters, tonight is a night when we will recall the sacrifice and the martyrdom of Qasim ibn al-Hasan alayhi salatu wassalam. Dear brothers and sisters, Hazrat Qasim wasn't the only child of Imam Hassan to be martyred in Karbala. According to some historians, there were perhaps as many as 3 other brothers of Imam Hassan, of Hazrat Qasim, all children of Imam Hassan, that were also martyred in Karbala. So it makes me wonder why this emphasis on Hazrat Qasim in particular. Why just Hazrat Qasim? When I thought over it, this is what came to my mind, and I thought I'd share it with you. Dear Momineen, when people such as me, a zakir, a speaker, a poet, when they recite and narrate the musibah of the Shuhada of Karbala, we make an effort to narrate the facts in a way that will trigger greater grief in the listeners. The facts, but narrated in a way which causes more sorrow to rise. So there is an effort that we put into this. But when I was reading what the Maqatil, the books in which the events related to his Shahada have been recorded, the sense I got was that there is no embellishment or effort required on my part. If I were to simply translate what is written there, this majlis would collapse in grief. Collapse in grief. And perhaps this is the reason why we have this focus on Hazrat Qasim. Perhaps this is why. As you know, he was a teenager or perhaps even a pre-teen when he was martyred. There are disagreements on his age. Some say 11, some say as high as 15. So this was a child basically, dear brothers and sisters. And this child was exceptionally good looking and handsome. Exceptionally so. Anyway, this family has been blessed not just with spiritual beauty, but physical beauty as well. Hazrat Qasim was only 2, maybe 3 or 4 years old when his father, Imam Hassan alayhi salam, was martyred. So he didn't really get to spend any time with his father. He grew up in Imam Hussein's house. He knew Imam Hussein as his father. That's the father figure in his life was Imam Hussein alayhi salam. But there was also Hazrat Abbas, there was Ali Akbar. These are the role models in his life as he is growing up. These are those Nurani personalities that he seeks to emulate and copy in every way. And which is why if we see this 11-year-old child, this 15-year-old teenager is the epitome of not just handsomeness and physical beauty, but all sorts of spiritual beauty as well. It is no surprise, it's the environment he's grown up in. And it is said Lady Zainab had a special role in his upbringing, a special role in his upbringing. We are now in the night preceding Ashura. The night preceding Ashura. Imam Hussain is seated along with his companions. And at a certain point during this night, Imam Hussain uses his special powers and privileges as the Imam of his time to show each and every one of his companions their station and position in the afterlife. One by one, he shows them. Now, Qasim is watching all this happening and he is beginning to worry. He is beginning to worry. Why is he worried? He is worried because he has not been shown his station in the afterlife. He begins to wonder, oh my God, is it the case that I will not be martyred tomorrow? Could it be that my uncle Hussein, out of his fatherly love for me, will not give me permission to go and fight in battle? Will I be deprived of this wonderful opportunity? He is worried. And so he goes up to Imam Hussein and he says, Ya Amma, what will be my position in the afterlife after I am martyred? He doesn't even want to ask whether I will be martyred or not. He says, when I am martyred, what will be my position? Imam Hussain gives him a long, loving look, turns away, but does not answer his question. The little child begins to follow Imam Hussain around, asking him, Ya Amma, oh uncle, tell me, what will be my stature? What will be my position? What will be my position after martyrdom? After he's done this for a while, Imam Hussain turns around, faces him, and replies. But he doesn't reply with the answer that he's looking for. He replies with another question. He asks him, Oh my son Qasim, dear Qasim, how do you view death? How is death in your eyes? This is a question being put to a child, ladies and gentlemen, brothers and sisters, a child who has his whole life ahead of him, a life of joy and happiness. He is being asked, how do you view death? And what does Qasim ibn al-Hasan al-Mujtaba say? He says, Ahla min al-asal. Death in my eyes is sweeter even than honey is. Ahla min al-asal, sweeter than honey. And of course, this is not just any ordinary death. He understands this is death for this movement, for the Imam of his time. Ahla min al-asal. Look at the ma'rifah. Look at the ma'rifah of this child. This is what the children of this household, this is what the children of this movement are and can be. But he still hasn't got his answer yet. It is now the afternoon of the day of Ashura. The afternoon of the day of Ashura. All the companions have been martyred. Most of the Bani Hashim have been martyred. And at this time, Qasim goes up to Hussein again and says, Ya Amma, oh uncle, may I please have permission to go to battle? Can you please let me go and fight the enemy? Imam Hussain is avoiding him. And now Qasim, when he sees that things are getting desperate, he holds Imam Hussein's hand and starts to kiss it. That's what the Maqtal says. He is kissing his uncle's hand and begging and pleading to be allowed to go and fight. And when that doesn't work, he falls to the floor and begins to kiss the holy feet of his uncle Imam Hussain, begging for permission to go and fight. And it is at this point finally that Imam Hussain gives him permission. He gives him permission. Qasim, who was begging and pleading, but in control of his emotion, breaks down in happiness and joy and begins to cry at this point. And now the uncle and the nephew, they hug each other, both of them sobbing and crying uncontrollably. And the Maqtal says that they momentarily fell unconscious. It is now time for battle, Mu'mineen and Mu'minat. It is time to prepare Qasim ibn al-Hasan for battle. Imam Hussain and his remaining family members are preparing Qasim. They call for the coat of armor, the chain mail, the armor that warriors used to wear. They dress him in this armor and they see that it's too big. It's dragging on the floor. This is a child after all. Even if they find the smallest armor, it has been made for grown men, not for children. So they decide that they will send Qasim without any armor. They ask for a helmet, a war helmet to protect his head. They place that on his head, it slips down and covers his eyes. They don't have a small enough helmet for Qasim. So they decide they will send him without a helmet and an armor. And this is how Qasim ibn Ali steps out to do battle. The enemy sees him coming out of the tent ready to fight. We have words of the enemy narrated in our tradition. The enemy says, I could see that a child came out from Hussein ibn Ali's camp to fight us. I can remember everything as clearly as if it had happened just this morning. In fact, I remember that one of his shoelaces was broken. This child who had a broken shoelace, the enemy notes this. Another enemy says that I saw a child and I was mesmerized because it looked to me as if a slice of the full moon had come out to fight us. He may be a child, dear brothers and sisters, but he is no ordinary child. When one of the champions of the Yazidi army sends forth his sons, his children, to fight Qasim ibn Ali, Qasim kills these children of this champion one by one. These children are grown men. These grown men, one by one. And that's when a shudder runs down the spine of the enemy. That's when a shudder runs down. They realize that they cannot defeat him in one-to-one combat. And that's when they attack in a swarm. That's when they attack in a swarm. Qasim gives battle, kills many of them. But then the inevitable happens, dear brothers and sisters. You have all heard over the preceding nights that when somebody used to fall off their horse in Karbala, they would call out to Imam Hussein saying, "Oh my Imam, please accept my last salutations and salam." But when Qasim fell down, this is not what he said. Perhaps it's because he's a child. He says, "Oh Amma, oh my uncle, please come and help me. Ya Amma, adrikni." Just as Qasim's call was unique, Hussein's response was unique as well. The Maqtal says he got onto his horse and he moved towards where Qasim was with such lightning speed that it reminded people of the manner in which an eagle swoops down from the sky to grab its prey. The enemy was terrified. Haidar al-Karrar's son is charging towards us on a horse. We must run to save our lives. They forget about Qasim. They wearing their military boots, the horses with their iron horseshoes, they begin to run helter-skelter. They begin to run over Qasim from this side to that side, from that side to this side. And when Imam Hussein finally reaches Qasim, the dust clears. He sees Qasim broken, crushed, mangled. And Hussein says, "My dear Qasim, it is unbearable for me that you call out to me for help and I am unable to help you." Ala la'natullahi ala al-qawmi al-zalimin saya'lamu alladhina zalamu ayya munqalibin yanqalibu.